The gunshot echoed through Warehouse 12 at Port Newark, a wet crack that split the rain-soaked night. Gianna Valentina stood in the center of $50 million worth of diamonds scattered across oil-stained concrete like broken stars. Blood, not hers, spattered her white inspector's blouse. The Glock 19 in her right hand, still warm barrel, pointed at the corpse of Dmitry Volkov, whose skull had opened like a split melon 3 feet from where she stood. Dante Salvatore knelt 10 yards away, one hand pressed against his ribs where a bullet had carved a shallow trench through expensive fabric and skin. He looked up at her through the smoke and cordite haze, dark eyes wide with something between shock and recognition. She switched languages without thinking, the Sicilian dialect of Palermo rolling off her tongue like a prayer her grandmother might have whispered, "Ora mi devi la vita, Salvatore." "Now you owe me your life." His mouth opened, closed. Rain hammered the warehouse's shattered skylight, mixing with the chemical stink of gunpowder and the copper tang of fresh death. But that moment, the one where everything broke and reformed into something new, that came later. 6 hours earlier, Gianna had been someone else entirely, or pretending to be someone else, which in her line of work amounted to the same thing. The walk-up apartment in Astoria smelled like old radiator heat and the Thai takeout from 2 nights ago that she hadn't bothered to throw out. Gianna stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, pulling her dark hair into the same utilitarian bun she'd worn for 6 months. The scar above her left eyebrow, a thin white line she'd earned in a Zurich training facility when she was 17, disappeared under a careful application of Dermablend concealer. She studied her reflection the way a jeweler might examine a fake stone under magnification, looking for flaws that would give her away. 24 years old, 5'6", green eyes the color of sea glass. Her father's eyes, though she tried not to think about that. The face that looked back at her belonged to Gia Valentina from Ohio, a waitress who made $9 an hour plus tips at Luciano's Bistro in Greenwich Village. Nobody special, nobody worth remembering. She opened the medicine cabinet. Behind the generic ibuprofen and drugstore moisturizer sat a hollowed-out deodorant stick. Inside, 3 fake passports, a burner phone with 2 contacts programmed in, and $5,000 in hundreds rubber-banded tight. She pulled out the phone, thumbed it on, checked for messages. Nothing. The silence felt heavier than words. Her real phone, the one registered to Gia Valentina, with a payment history and a cracked screen protector, buzzed on the sink. A text from Marco, the day manager at Luciano's. "Need you in early. 4 p.m. Big party tonight." She typed back with practiced casualty, "Okay, see you then." The bottom drawer of her nightstand held the things Gia Valentina would never own. A Beretta 92 FS, cleaned and loaded, wrapped in a Whole Foods bag. A gold locket on a delicate chain, the kind that looked like costume jewelry until you opened it and saw the photograph inside. She picked up the locket, felt its weight in her palm. The photo showed a man in his 40s, handsome in the way Italian men often are, with deep-set eyes and a smile that suggested he knew secrets worth keeping. Marco Castellano, her father. Dead 10 years this November. The story she'd been told, the one that had shaped every decision she'd made since turning 14, was simple and brutal. Giovanni Salvatore, then the Don of the Salvatore family, had murdered Marco Castellano in his own home to seize the Castellano territory in Lower Manhattan. The fire that followed had been staged to cover the execution. Her mother, already sick with cancer, had died 3 months later. The family soldiers, the ones who survived, had scattered like roaches when the lights come on. Gianna had been shipped to a boarding school in Switzerland by her father's most trusted lieutenant, a man named Silvio Greco, who'd promised to return for her when the time was right. Instead, he'd disappeared. For 10 years she'd prepared. Languages, combat, finance. The kind of education that turned a grieving teenager into a precision instrument designed for one purpose: revenge. 2 months ago, Giovanni Salvatore had suffered a massive heart attack at the Plaza Hotel during a meeting with Russian contractors. His son Dante, 32, educated at Wharton, ruthless in the methodical way of men who'd grown up watching their fathers build empires on broken bones, had assumed control of the family. The transition had been smooth. Too smooth, some whispered. Fathers didn't usually die so conveniently when their sons were hungry for power. Gianna had secured her job at Luciano's Bistro 3 weeks after Dante's coronation. The restaurant sat 2 blocks from the building where Dante kept his office, and he was known to stop in for late dinners when he wanted privacy away from his usual haunts. She'd bribed the manager with $2,000 and a story about needing flexible hours for her sick grandmother. He'd hired her without checking references too carefully because good waitresses who showed up on time were hard to find. She'd been patient, watching, learning his patterns. Dante Salvatore came to Luciano's every other Tuesday around 10 p.m., always with 2 bodyguards, always sitting at table 7 in the back where he could see both exits. He ordered the same thing, grilled branzino, no sides, espresso after. He tipped exactly 20%. He never looked at her twice. Tonight was Wednesday, not Tuesday. She hadn't expected him. The bistro's dining room smelled like garlic and old wine, the familiar scent that had become her cover's signature perfume. She'd been working since 4, moving through the early dinner rush with the efficient invisibility she'd cultivated. Table 2 needed more bread. Table 5 wanted their check. Table 8 was still deciding between the veal and the chicken parm. Could she come back in a minute? At 10:17 p.m. the front door opened. Rain blew in with the 3 men who entered, and Gianna felt every nerve in her body go taut. Dante Salvatore wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. Water beaded on the fabric like mercury. His bodyguards, Marcus, the tall one with a scar through his left eyebrow, and Leo, shorter but built like a fire hydrant, flanked him with the casual readiness of men who'd killed before and expected to again. They didn't wait to be seated. Dante walked straight to table 7, her section, and sat down. Marcus took a position near the front door. Leo stationed himself at the counter with a sight line to both the kitchen entrance and the bathrooms. Professional. Thorough. Gianna picked up her notepad, forced her breathing to steady. This was it. 6 months of preparation compressed into whatever happened in the next 20 minutes. She approached the table. Dante was scrolling through his phone, thumb moving with agitated speed. He didn't look up. Her voice came out flat, bored, exactly the way a waitress who'd been on her feet for 6 hours would sound, coffee black. He kept scrolling. The rain hammered against the front windows, and somewhere in the kitchen, one of the line cooks dropped a pan with a crash that made everyone except Dante flinch. "Menu," she tried. His eyes flicked up, dark brown, almost black in the bistro's dim lighting, assessing her with the same attention he might give to a chair or a coat rack. Something to be used and forgotten. "Did I ask for a menu?" His voice carried the kind of New York accent that expensive schools tried to sand away but never quite managed. "Just coffee, and make sure the cup is clean this time. This place looks like a rat trap." She didn't flinch. She'd been called worse by better men. Turning on her heel, she walked to the coffee station, feeling his eyes on her back for exactly 3 seconds before he returned to his phone. Her hands didn't shake as she poured. Steam rose in the humid air. She carried the cup back and set it down on the table harder than necessary. Coffee sloshed over the rim onto the white saucer, a small brown lake spreading toward his phone. Dante stared at the spill. The silence stretched like piano wire about to snap. Then he turned his head toward Marcus, still standing by the door, and spoke in rapid-fire Sicilian. Not the textbook Italian taught in college courses, but the specific vernacular of Palermo's rough neighborhoods, the kind of dialect that marked you as either very old money or very connected. "Guarda sta femmina, scrazzata come una vaca, puzza di canizzo e sbaglio, picchi venemu a stu buco di merda." Look at this woman, clumsy as a cow. She smells like cheap bleach and mistakes. "Why do we come to this shithole?" Marcus smirked. Leo by the counter shook his head in shared disdain. They thought she couldn't understand. Thought she was just another invisible servant in a city full of them. Gianna felt ice crystallize in her veins. For 6 months she'd been invisible. For 10 years before that, she'd been patient. But this casual contempt delivered in the language her father had taught her before she could read the language he'd spoken when he wanted to share secrets or tell stories about the old country. This she couldn't let pass. She switched languages without transition, her Sicilian flawless, every syllable landing like a slap. "U caffè è frisco Salvatore. E si puzzu di cannizzo e picchi u usu pipuliziari a munizza lasata di lomini como avosia." The coffee is fresh Salvatore, and if I smell like bleach, it's because I use it to clean up the garbage left by men like you. The bistro's ambient noise conversations, the clink of silverware, the hiss of the espresso machine died. Every eye in the restaurant turned toward table 7. Dante's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. Marcus's hand disappeared inside his jacket where the shoulder holster sat. Leo straightened from his lean against the counter, suddenly alert. Gianna leaned forward close enough that only Dante could hear the next words. She kept her voice low, conversational, but let the Palermo accent thicken. "Almenu unun puzzu como usangu di me patri." At least I don't smell like my father's blood. It was a specific accusation. The rumors had circulated in the right circles for 2 months. Dante Salvatore had accelerated his father's heart attack. Nothing provable. Nothing anyone would say to the new Don's face. But the whisper network that connected bartenders and drivers and mistresses had carried the story from Little Italy to Brighton Beach. Dante's face went white, then red, then something harder and colder than either. He set the coffee cup down with infinite care, the way a man might handle a live grenade. When he looked up at her, his eyes held a calculation she recognized the assessment a predator makes when it encounters something that might be prey or might be competition. "What did you say?" His English came out rough, shredded at the edges. She straightened, pulled the check from her apron pocket and dropped it on the wet table. "You heard me. Leave a $100 tip for the insult, then get out before I make a phone call you really don't want me to make." Marcus had his gun halfway out. Leo was moving around the counter. The other diners had started to notice conversations trailing off into tense silence. Dante held up one hand, stopping his men without looking at them. He studied Gianna's face like a book written in a language he was only beginning to understand. She could see the questions forming. Who speaks that dialect in New York? Only the old families, the exiled, the dead. "Who are you?" he asked, still in English, but the command in his voice suggested he was used to answers. "Nobody." She met his stare without blinking. "Just a clumsy cow, remember." She ripped the check off her pad, slammed it onto the table next to his untouched coffee and walked away. Her legs felt steady. Her hands were steady. Everything was steady except her heartbeat, which hammered against her ribs like it was trying to break free. In the kitchen, she pushed through the swinging doors and kept walking to the back exit. Behind her, she heard chair legs scraping the murmur of voices. She didn't look back. The alley smelled like garbage and rain. She pulled out a pack of cigarettes she'd bought for exactly this purpose, props for the character, and lit one with shaking hands. The nicotine hit her system. She leaned against the wet brick wall and closed her eyes. Stupid. So incredibly stupid. 6 months of careful invisibility blown in 30 seconds of pride. But hearing that dialect, hearing the contempt in his voice, something in her had snapped. Her father's daughter, after all. She pulled the burner phone from her apron and dialed the only number programmed into it. It rang twice before connecting to a voice she'd never met face to face, digitally distorted into a mechanical buzz. "Report. I've been compromised." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Salvatore came in. I engaged." A pause that felt like falling. "You what?" The distortion couldn't hide the fury underneath. "You were told to observe. You're a sleeper asset, Adriana. You don't engage." The name hit her like a fist. Adriana. Her real name, the one she'd buried under layers of false identification and practiced lies. Only 2 people in the world knew it, the voice on the phone and Silvio Greco if he was still alive. He insulted the family. She took a drag, watched the cherry glow orange in the darkness. He spoke the dialect. He's getting sloppy disrespectful. He doesn't honor the old codes. Dante Salvatore is a rabid dog. That's precisely why we're letting him run loose, so he leads us to the rest of the pack. If you blew your cover, you're on your own. We can't extract you yet. The operation is set for Friday. Friday is too late. He's going to look into me. He'll find the holes in the Gia Valentina identity by morning. Then handle it. You're the daughter of the wolf. Act like it." The line went dead. She looked at the phone for a long moment, then smashed it against the brick wall. Plastic shattered. The SIM card skittered across wet asphalt. She crushed it under her boot heel until it was powder and fragments. Daughter of the wolf. Marco Castellano's nickname in the old days had been Il Lupo, the wolf. Fast, smart, vicious when cornered. She'd inherited his eyes and his talent for languages. She hoped she'd inherited his instincts too, because she was going to need them. The crunch of footsteps on gravel made her spin around. A silhouette stood at the mouth of the alley, backlit by the street lamps on West 4th. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that would never survive the rain unchanged. Dante's voice echoed off the wet bricks. "You smoke cheap cigarettes for someone who speaks like a queen." She didn't reach for the Beretta she'd left in her nightstand drawer. Stupid, so goddamn stupid. Instead, she grabbed an empty glass soda bottle from the recycling crate near the dumpster and held it behind her back. "And you drive a very loud car for someone trying to sneak up on a woman," she called back. He stepped into the dim light of the alley, alone. No Marcus, no Leo. He held his hands up, palms open, showing he wasn't holding a weapon. The rain plastered his dark hair to his skull. Water ran down his face like tears. "I checked your file, Gia." He emphasized the fake name. "Gia Valentina from Ohio. Social Security number checks out. Tax returns, driver's license, parking tickets. Very boring. Very clean. Too clean." She said nothing. The bottle felt slippery in her grip. "Europol, however, seems to think you were in Milan 5 years ago." He took a step closer. "Shopping trip. I have a common face. Do you—" Another step. The distance between them collapsed to maybe 15 feet. "My father used to tell me stories about a girl, the Castellano girl. He said she died in a fire in Sicily along with her mother. They never found the bodies." Her heart hammered. The rain felt cold enough to burn. "Sad story," she managed. "Is it—" Dante tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle with missing pieces. "Because if that girl were alive, she'd be the heir to the Castellano territory, the territory I'm currently struggling to hold. She'd be the only person in this city with a legitimate claim to challenge me. I'm just a waitress Salvatore. I serve coffee, I wipe tables, go home." He lunged. Not an attack, a test. He moved fast, closing the gap, reaching for her wrist. But Gianna had trained for this exact scenario 1,000 times in a dozen countries. She dropped the bottle, spun into his guard, used his own momentum to slam him face first against the brick wall. In 2 seconds, she had his arm twisted behind his back and her forearm pressed against his windpipe. Krav Maga mixed with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the kind of techniques they didn't teach in Ohio. Dante gasped for air, his face scraping wet brick. Then he laughed, a choked, manic sound that vibrated through her arm. "Ohio, huh? Must be a rough neighborhood." She realized her mistake. Pushed him away hard enough to send him stumbling. He caught himself against the dumpster, straightened his ruined suit, rubbed his neck. When he looked at her again, fury and fascination warred in his expression. "You're her." Not a question. "Adriana Castellano." "If I were her," Gianna said, her voice dropping to something dangerous, "you'd already be dead." "Maybe." His grin was sharp enough to cut. "Or maybe you're waiting for the right moment. But here's the problem, Princess. Now that I know, I can't let you leave." Before she could move, blinding white light flooded the alley. Tires screeched on wet pavement. A black Escalade skidded to a stop, blocking the alley's only exit. Doors flew open. Men poured out, 6 of them, wearing black tactical gear and ski masks, carrying suppressed Heckler & Koch MP5s that meant serious money and serious intent. Dante's smile vanished. He looked at the men, then at Gianna. "Yours?" "No." Fear spiked through her adrenaline. "I thought they were yours." He cursed in Sicilian, eloquent and vicious. The first 3-round burst stitched holes in the brick 6 inches from his head. Concrete dust exploded into the rain. Gianna didn't think, didn't calculate. She tackled Dante Salvatore, the man she'd spent 10 years planning to kill, and dragged him behind the heavy steel dumpster as the alley erupted into a hail of suppressed gunfire. The sound was wrong, muted thuds instead of proper cracks, which meant professionals. Which meant this wasn't random. Pressed against wet asphalt and garbage juice, Dante's expensive suit soaking through with things she didn't want to identify, Gianna felt reality shift. Everything she'd believed, every plan she'd made, every certainty she'd built her life around, all of it was crumbling. Because these men weren't here for her. And they weren't here on Dante's orders. Someone else was playing a game she hadn't known existed. And the only way to survive long enough to figure out the rules was to keep the man she'd sworn to kill alive. The universe, Gianna thought as bullets punched through the dumpster's steel hide like it was tinfoil, had a truly sick sense of humor. The dumpster wouldn't hold. Gianna could hear it in the way the bullets punched through steel, each impact a fraction deeper than the last. 3 seconds, maybe 4, before the suppressing fire found flesh instead of metal. Dante pressed against her in the confined space, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat through the soaked fabric of his suit. His breath came fast, but controlled the breathing of someone who'd been in tight spots before. "Do you have a piece?" she shouted over the mechanical thunder. He reached down, fumbled with his right pant leg, produced a compact Sig Sauer P365, backup gun, maybe 7 rounds if he'd kept it loaded properly. "Save them," she commanded, not asking. The waitress was gone. The woman who'd spent 10 years learning how to kill spoke now. "They're suppressing us so they can flank. We have 10 seconds before they come around both sides and turn us into Swiss cheese. And do you have a plan, princess?" He checked the chamber, found it loaded. "Or are you just going to critique my ammo count? Kitchen door, 5 feet away." She pointed to the metal service entrance she'd walked through 100 times. "It's locked from the inside. You need to shoot the hinges. That's solid steel. Do it." He didn't argue further. Rolling out from behind their cover, he fired 3 precise shots, 2 at the top hinge, 1 at the bottom, then rolled back as a spray of bullets sparked against the pavement where his head had been a second before. The suppressed weapons coughed their deadly rhythm. Gianna didn't hesitate. She launched herself at the door in a flying kick she'd practiced on heavy bags in Zurich, all her weight behind her right heel. The weakened hinges gave with a shriek of tearing metal. The door collapsed inward, and she crashed onto the greasy tile floor of Luciano's kitchen. She scrambled up, grabbed Dante by his suit collar as he dove through after her, hauled him inside with strength that came from pure adrenaline. Together they shoved a heavy prep table against the ruined doorway, just as bullets began punching through the metal, pinging off stainless steel pots hanging from ceiling hooks. The kitchen was chaos. Big Mike, the head cook, a terrifying man who stood 6'4" and weighed maybe 280, all of it muscle from a youth spent in the Marines, was cowering behind the grill. The line cooks had already fled toward the dining room. "Mike, get out!" Gianna yelled. "Front exit, now go!" He didn't need telling twice. The big man scrambled toward the swinging doors that led to the dining area, moving with surprising speed for his size. "Who are they?" Dante scanned the kitchen for threats, the SIG tracking his sightline. Gianna grabbed a cast-iron skillet in one hand, a butcher knife in the other. She moved to the service window that looked out on the dining room, checking sightlines. "Russians. Volkov's men. I saw the tattoos on their wrists when they stepped out of the Escalade. The burning star." His face darkened. "Viktor Volkov swore neutrality. He wouldn't dare move on me in the village." "Unless someone gave him the green light," she finished. "Someone close to you." Before he could process that betrayal, the back door exploded inward. The prep table went flying, crashing into the industrial refrigerator with a sound like a car accident. 2 men in tactical gear stormed in, MP5s raised. Dante fired, 1 shot center mass. The first attacker dropped choking on his own blood, but the second one had his rifle up, finger tightening on the trigger. Gianna moved like water. She threw the cast-iron skillet frisbee style, all the torque from her hips and shoulders. It smashed into the gunman's face with a wet crunch that said, broken nose, broken cheekbones, maybe skull fracture. His aim went wild bullets stitching a line across the ceiling tiles. As he stumbled, she closed the distance, sliding across the slick floor, slippery with spilled oil. The butcher knife drove into the gap in his body armor just under the armpit, seeking the subclavian artery. He collapsed, gurgling, drowning in his own blood. Dante stared at her. She'd seen that look before in training instructors' eyes when a student exceeded expectations. Surprise mixed with something like respect. "Stop staring and move," she hissed, already pulling the dead man's MP5 free, checking the magazine. 23 rounds left. "Front door now." They sprinted through the dining area. The few customers who'd remained frozen in terror or stupidity screamed and dove under tables. Gianna vaulted over the counter like she'd done it 1,000 times, snagged a set of keys from the hook near the register. Her car keys. The beige 2014 Honda Civic she'd bought for $800 cash from a divorced teacher in Queens. They burst out onto West 4th Street. Rain hammered down in sheets. The streetlights turned everything into a noir film, all high contrast and pooling shadows. Gianna ran toward the hydrant where she'd illegally parked the Civic, Dante keeping pace beside her. "My car." He gestured toward the black Rolls-Royce Phantom parked half a block down, armored and bulletproof. "Too conspicuous," she panted. "Probably rigged to blow by now." She unlocked the Honda. He looked at the dented beige sedan with visible disdain, like she'd offered him a bicycle. "You have to be joking." The black Escalade screeched around the corner from the alley. Windows rolled down. Muzzle flashes lit up the night. "Would you prefer the hearse?" She dove into the driver's seat. Dante threw himself into the passenger side as bullets spiderwebbed the windshield. She turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed. "Come on, you piece of junk." Second try. The four-cylinder roared to life, well wheezed to life, but it was running. She slammed the transmission into drive and peeled out tires, smoking on wet pavement. Behind them, the Escalade accelerated in pursuit. Gianna drove like she'd trained to drive, which was to say, like someone who'd done time on the Autobahn and the mountain roads outside Geneva. She wove through Manhattan traffic, running red lights, drifting around corners with terrifying control. The Civic's tires screamed, horns blared. She cut across 2 lanes, shot through a gap between a taxi and a delivery truck that couldn't have been more than 6 inches on either side. In the passenger seat, Dante gripped the handle above the door, hard enough to leave fingerprints in the plastic. "Where'd you learn to drive?" "Ohio's very competitive," she deadpanned, jerking the wheel left to avoid a pedestrian. The Escalade was gaining. Heavier, more powerful, probably armored. On straightaways, she couldn't outrun it. She needed terrain advantage. "Head to the meatpacking district," Dante instructed, his knuckles white on the door handle. "Cobblestone streets, narrow turns. I know a spot." "You trust me to drive you there?" He looked at the gun in his hand, then at her. Something shifted in his expression, a calculation she couldn't quite read. "You haven't killed me yet, Castellano, and right now you're the only thing standing between me and a Russian shallow grave. Drive." The chase ended in a cloud of steam and screaming metal near Hudson Yards. Gianna had lured the heavy Escalade into a construction site, weaving through concrete pillars and stacks of steel beams. The Russians miscalculated a turn, hit the wet cobblestones wrong, and slammed into a pile of I-beams at 40 miles an hour. The sound was catastrophic. Metal shrieked, glass exploded, the Escalade's front end crumpled like tinfoil. Gianna didn't slow down to check for survivors. She ditched the Honda 3 blocks away in an alley behind a high-end art gallery, wiping down surfaces they'd touched out of habit rather than necessity. In another hour, the car would be stripped or towed. Either way, untraceable. They moved on foot through the rain, sticking to alleys and loading docks. Dante led her to an unmarked freight elevator hidden behind a loose brick in a wall that looked condemned. He punched a code into a keypad, 72941. The elevator groaned to life, cables creaking. "Safe house?" she asked, breathing hard, adrenaline starting to crash. "Something like that." The elevator opened into a sprawling industrial loft that screamed money in the way only minimalist spaces can. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but heavy blackout curtains were already drawn. One wall held a bank of monitors displaying live feeds from various locations across New York docks, warehouses, restaurants. Another wall was exposed brick, probably original to the building. Concrete floors, leather furniture that looked like it cost more than most people's cars. Dante walked straight to a hidden bar, bypassing crystal decanters of expensive scotch for a bottle of rubbing alcohol and a first aid kit. He shrugged out of his ruined jacket, probably $3,000 of Italian tailoring, now fit only for the trash, and ripped his shirt open. The bullet had carved a shallow groove across his ribs, left side just deep enough to bleed steadily, but not deep enough to be life-threatening. "Fix it." He tossed the first aid kit onto a leather sofa. Gianna stood dripping on his expensive forearms, crossed every muscle in her body still coiled for a fight that might not be over. She'd just saved the life of the man whose family had destroyed hers. The cognitive dissonance made her want to scream. "Why should I should let you bleed out. It would save me a bullet." He looked up, dark eyes burning with something she couldn't quite name. Pain, yes, but also fury and calculation. "Because if I die tonight, the Russians take the city. And if the Russians take the city, they'll hunt down every single person with Castellano blood just to make sure no one challenges their claim, including you, including anyone you care about." The logic was sound, and she hated him for it. Hated him more because he was right. She grabbed the kit, sat down beside him close enough to work. The wound needed cleaning before infection set in. She poured alcohol over the graze without warning. Dante hissed through his teeth, jaw clenching, but didn't pull away. She worked with efficient precision, cleaning the torn flesh, applying butterfly bandages to hold the edges together. "You're good at this," he observed, watching her face. "Medical training. You learn a lot of things when you're raising yourself." She finished the last bandage, pressed it down firmly enough to make him wince. "Done." Standing up, she put distance between them, walked to the far side of the loft. Through the gap in the curtains, she could see the city lights spreading out like a field of stars. Somewhere out there, people were sleeping in beds, worried about normal things like bills and relationships and whether it would rain tomorrow. She envied them so much it hurt. Dante poured himself a drink, real scotch this time, something amber and expensive, and downed it in one swallow. He picked up his phone, which had been buzzing incessantly since they'd arrived, and unlocked it. His face went very still. He turned the screen toward her. A text message, time-stamped 23 minutes ago, right when the shooting had started. "Uncle Luca, I'm sorry, Don. It's business. The Russians offered double for the ports." The words sat there like a grenade with the pin pulled. Gianna read them twice, processing. Salvatore Luca Dante's consigliere, his father's brother, the man who should have been the most loyal person in the organization. Selling out to Viktor Volkov, your own uncle. She couldn't keep the bitter smile off her face. "History repeats itself, doesn't it? My father was betrayed by his lieutenant. That lieutenant was your father." Dante stood up slowly, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his bandaged ribs. He walked to the wall of monitors, studying feeds that showed nothing but empty streets and closed buildings. The Castellano family was wiped out because Marco Castellano was weak. My father took over to save the organization from collapsing into chaos. Heat flared in her chest, burning away the exhaustion. My father wasn't weak. He was a man of honor. Your father was a butcher who murdered him in his sleep. Is that what they told you? Dante turned to face her. Whoever trained you, whoever turned you into this ghost. I saw the bodies. Her voice came out raw. The closed caskets, the fire reports. Did you? He challenged. You were 12. You were at a boarding school in Zurich. You saw what they wanted you to see. He crossed to a safe hidden behind a painting abstract art that probably cost 6 figures and spun the combination dial. The safe opened with a heavy click. He pulled out a weathered manila envelope, the kind that yellows with age, and tossed it onto the coffee table between them. Read it. Gianna hesitated. This could be a trap, a manipulation. But curiosity, or maybe the desperate need to know the truth, made her reach for the envelope. Inside, police reports, autopsy photos, coroner's records, official documents with official seals. She flipped through them. Her hands started shaking. The police report for the fire that supposedly killed her family was dated wrong, 2 days after Marco Castellano had allegedly died. And the autopsy report, she had to read it 3 times before the words made sense. Marco Castellano. Gunshot wound to the back of the head. Caliber .22 close range. Time of death approximately 72 hours before body discovered. 72 hours before the fire. 3 days. My father carried a .45, Dante said quietly. Always. He called .22s rat guns, said only cowards used them. He didn't kill Marco. He found him already dead. She looked up from the papers, feeling reality tilt on its axis. Then who? Look at the signature on the coroner's report. She squinted at the cursive scrawl. The name swam into focus, Dr. Volkov. The room went silent except for the hum of servers in the corner and the distant sound of rain against windows. Volkov. The name tasted like poison. The Russians didn't just move in now. They've been here, playing the long game. Exactly. Dante poured another drink, offered her the glass. She took it, downed it without tasting. The burn helped anchor her. They killed your father to create a power vacuum. They framed my father to start a war between our families, knowing we'd bleed each other dry doing their work for them. And we did. We destroyed each other while they waited and watched and planned. And now that you're the only one left standing, Gianna continued, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity, your uncle decided it was time to cash out and hand them the keys to the kingdom. He leaned forward, his face inches from hers. She could see the faint scar through his left eyebrow, probably from some childhood accident. Could smell the expensive cologne mixed with sweat and copper blood. I didn't kill your family, Adriana. But the men who did are coming for both of us right now. She stared at the photos spread across the table. Her entire reality, the foundation of her vengeance, the purpose that had sustained her through 10 years of training and preparation, was cracking. If Dante was telling the truth and these documents looked authentic, then she'd been hunting the wrong prey. She'd been manipulated, used, aimed like a weapon at the wrong target. So, her voice came out harder than she intended, but steel was the only thing holding her together. Luca Salvatore and Victor Volkov. What do we do about it? They have an army, Dante pointed out, sitting back down with a grimace. I have a grazed rib, a waitress with exceptional combat skills and 6 bullets left. Gianna stood up. She reached into her hair, pulled out the pins that held her bun in place. Her dark hair cascaded down over her shoulders. She ripped off the stained apron that marked her as Gia Valentina Nobody from Nowhere and threw it on the floor. You don't have a waitress. She met his eyes. You have a Castellano, and I know exactly where Volkov keeps his money. She walked over to the wall of monitors, pointed to a screen showing a warehouse in the Bronx, one of dozens cycling through the feeds. That's where Volkov keeps his cash reserves. I've been tracking it for 6 months, planning to rob it to fund my war against you. Dante's grin was sharp, wolfish, the expression of a man who'd found an unexpected advantage. You want to rob the Russians? No. She picked up the Sig Sauer from where he'd left it on the table, checked the magazine out of habit. I want to burn it to the ground. We cut off their money, we cut off their loyalty. Uncle Luca won't work for free. And then, she racked the slide with a satisfying metallic snap. And then we go to dinner. I hear there's a vacancy for a new management team. Dante laughed. It was the first genuine sound of amusement she'd heard from him, raw and real. All right, partner, let's go start a fire. But as they turned toward the door, the lights in the loft died. Total darkness for 3 seconds before emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. The electronic locks on the heavy steel entrance door clicked open with a sound like breaking bones. Red laser sights cut through the gloom, a dozen of them dancing across Dante's chest like fireflies. The monitors showed nothing. The feeds had been cut, replaced with static. Gianna grabbed Dante's arm, yanked him down as the windows exploded inward. Rappelling ropes swung through shattered glass, and men in tactical gear descended like spiders, fast roping from the roof with professional precision. They found us, Dante growled, pressing flat against the floor. They were always going to find us. Gianna's mind raced through options, calculating angles and odds. Your uncle knows every safe house. Probably gave them the codes. Flashbangs were coming next, or worse. They had maybe seconds before the room turned into a kill box. The safe, she hissed, crawling toward it on her elbows. "What else is in there? Guns, money, passports. Grenades." He understood immediately. 2 M67 fragmentation grenades. Top shelf. She slithered across the floor using furniture for cover. Bullets punched through the leather sofa, sending up puffs of white stuffing. The men were inside now, 6 of them spreading in a tactical fan formation. Night vision goggles glowed green in the dim emergency lighting. Gianna reached the safe, grabbed both grenades. But she didn't throw them, not yet. Instead, she pulled a road flare from the emergency kit next to the safe, struck it, and rolled it across the floor. The magnesium light erupted with blinding white intensity. The night vision goggles flared out, overloading. Screams of pain and confusion echoed in the industrial space. "Now!" she yelled. She pulled the pins on both grenades, counted to 2, and lobbed them toward the main cluster of attackers. Not to kill the distance was wrong, but to scatter. The concussions were massive percussion waves that knocked the wind out of everyone in the room. Windows that had survived the initial breach now shattered completely. In the chaos, Gianna moved. She found the first man disoriented and clawing at his helmet, trying to rip off the useless night vision. She didn't use a gun. The butcher knife from the kitchen was still in her boot. One slash to the hamstring dropped him. The hilt strike to the temple finished it. Dante was on his feet, firing the last of his rounds at shapes moving through the smoke. One attacker went down. Then the slide locked back on an empty chamber. "Move to the exit," he roared. "The elevator's a death trap," Gianna shouted back, scanning for options. "They'll have it rigged." He grabbed her wrist, pulled her toward the master bedroom. "Not the elevator." The bedroom was massive, minimalist, dominated by a bed that probably cost more than a year's rent. Dante kicked open the walk-in closet, larger than most Manhattan studio apartments, and shoved aside a rack of winter coats. Behind it, an industrial laundry chute, the kind designed to send linens down to basement laundry services. "You're insane," she breathed. "It drops into a laundry cart. Soft landing. Maybe. Or a broken neck. Ladies first." He gestured. If they died, at least it would be quick. Gianna climbed into the metal tube, crossed her arms over her chest like a corpse, and let go. The slide was terrifyingly fast, a dark claustrophobic spiral of polished steel. She shot out the bottom, crashed into a pile of dirty towels in a canvas cart, and rolled onto concrete. The impact knocked the wind out of her. A second later, Dante landed on top of her with his full weight, and what little air remained in her lungs evacuated. "Get off!" she wheezed, shoving him. They tumbled out of the cart onto the cold floor of the building's sub-basement. Quiet here, almost peaceful. The smell of industrial detergent and boiler fumes hung in the air. "Garage access is through that door." Dante pointed to a steel fire door. "My car's gone, but the building manager drives a Ford Raptor, silver with a lift kit. We're stealing the super's truck. I bought him that truck for Christmas last year. Technically, I'm repossessing it." They burst through the door into the parking garage, dimly lit, full of luxury sedans, sitting silent. The Ford Raptor was parked near the exit ramp, just like Dante said. As they ran toward it, the elevator at the far end chimed. The doors opened. 3 men stepped out. Not tactical gear this time, suits, expensive ones. At the front was a man Gianna recognized from surveillance photos, Luca Salvatore, Dante's uncle. 60, maybe 65, with silver hair and a face that gravity had started winning against. He carried a cane in one hand and a Beretta 92 FS in the other. Dante froze his hand on the Raptor's door handle. The betrayal on his face was physical, like taking a gut punch. "Uncle Luca!" The old man's voice boomed, echoing off concrete walls. "Stop running, nephew. It's over. You sold us out." Dante's voice shook with rage. "To the Russians. For what? A retirement home in Boca. For peace." Luca limped forward, his men flanking him, guns drawn but not quite aimed. "The war is bad for business, Dante. You're too aggressive, too reckless. Volkov offered a merger, a partnership. We keep construction and garbage. They take the ports and trucking. It's a good deal." "It's not a deal. It's surrender. And you killed Marco Castellano to set it up." Luca paused. Genuine confusion crossed his face. "Marco, that was 10 years ago, boy. That was your father's mess, the cleanup after the Russians made their first move. I'm trying to clean up your mess." "Liar." Gianna stepped out from behind the truck, leveling the MP5 she'd taken from the dead Russian. "You knew. You've always known." Luca squinted at her through the dim garage lighting. Recognition dawned slowly, then horror. "Who is this? The waitress?" He laughed dry and rasping. "Dante, you're throwing your life away for a piece of tail from a diner." "She's not a waitress, Uncle." Dante's voice went cold final. "She's Adriana Castellano." All color drained from Luca's face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost walk out of a grave he thought was sealed. "Impossible. She burned." "I survived," Gianna said, finger tightening on the trigger. Every muscle in her body coiled for what came next. "And I'm here to collect the debt." Luca raised his gun, aimed at Dante's chest. "Kill them both." Gianna squeezed the trigger. The MP5 roared in the enclosed space, the sound deafening. Luca's bodyguards returned fire. The garage erupted into chaos, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like strobe lights. Dante yanked the truck door open. "Get in." She sprayed a suppression burst toward the concrete pillar where Luca had dived for cover, forcing them to keep their heads down, and dove into the passenger seat. Dante was already hot-wiring the ignition, his fingers moving with practiced speed that suggested a misspent youth. The V8 engine roared to life, 450 horsepower of American excess. He slammed the transmission into drive and floored it. Ram speed. He didn't aim for the exit ramp. He aimed for Luca's Mercedes S-Class, blocking the path. The heavy pickup truck hit the sedan at 30 miles per hour with a crunch of metal and exploding safety glass. The Mercedes spun sideways like a toy. Luca scrambled backward, falling onto oil-stained concrete to avoid being crushed. As they roared past, Dante looked out the window. His eyes locked with his uncle's. There was no love left in that gaze, no family bond, only a promise. This isn't over. The Raptor tore up the exit ramp, smashed through the wooden parking arm like it wasn't there, and burst onto the rain-soaked streets of Chelsea. Behind them, gunfire popped uselessly into the night. Gianna checked the MP5's magazine. Empty. She tossed it into the back seat. "Where now?" "We can't go back to my place. We can't go to yours. Luca has the captains, the soldiers, the locations." Dante gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white jaw set. Water ran down the windshield in sheets. "We need an army, and I know exactly where to find one." "Where?" "The one place Luca and Volkov wouldn't dare look." He glanced at her, something like respect in his expression. "The Castellano crypt." St. Michael's Cemetery in Queens stretched out under the weeping gray sky like a city of marble and sorrow. The rain had turned into a cold drizzle that clung to everything, making the headstones glisten like wet bones. It was 2 a.m. on Thursday, and the only sounds were the hiss of water on stone and the distant rumble of traffic on the Van Wyck Expressway. Dante parked the stolen Raptor under a weeping willow whose branches touched the ground like mourning hands. He killed the engine. The silence felt enormous after hours of sirens and gunfire and the roar of that V8. Gianna looked out at the rows of headstones, thousands of them generations of New York's dead. Somewhere out there was her father's name carved into granite. She'd never visited, hadn't dared not while maintaining the Gia Valentina cover. Now the need pulled at her like gravity. "A graveyard." Her voice came out flat, exhausted. "You want to raise a zombie army." Dante opened his door, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandaged ribs. "My father respected your father. Even though they were rivals, when the Castellano estate was seized by the feds, my father bought the family mausoleum, kept it maintained, paid the taxes every year." She followed him out into the wet grass, her clothes still damp from earlier, her body running on fumes and adrenaline residue. "Why would he do that?" "Because he knew about the vault." They walked through silent rows of stone angels and marble crosses. Italian names dominated this section. Esposito DiMaggio Corleone names that carried weight in certain circles. The Castellano mausoleum stood at the end of a curved path, massive and black as obsidian. The family name was carved in gold relief above iron gates that looked like they could withstand artillery. Dante pulled a key from a chain around his neck, the kind of necklace that looked religious until you examined it closely. My father gave me this on his deathbed. He told me, in case of emergency break glass. I never understood what he meant until I started going through his files after the funeral, found references to the Castellano vault coordinates access codes. The key fit the lock perfectly. The gate swung open with a groan of old hinges that echoed in the quiet. Inside, the air smelled like marble dust and age. In the center of the room stood two sarcophagi, Marco Castellano and his wife Elena. Gianna's parents reduced to stone boxes. She walked over to her father's tomb, placed one hand on the cold surface. The grief she'd kept locked away for a decade threatened to crack through. She'd been so focused on revenge that she'd never properly mourned, never said goodbye. "He's not in there." Dante's voice was gentle, surprisingly so. She turned. "What? The coffin is empty." According to my father's notes, the police report said Marco was cremated, but that was a lie, too. The body disappeared from the morgue 2 days after the autopsy. My father suspected the Russians took it, destroyed the evidence. Gianna looked at the stone effigy of a man she barely remembered. 12 years old when he died, she'd had pieces of memory, fragments of laughter and the smell of his cologne, but not enough to build a complete picture. "Then this is just theater, a stage prop." "Not entirely." Dante walked to this back wall where a statue of a grieving angel stood, wings folded, face hidden. He reached behind the angel's right wing, felt along the wall until his fingers found something, a hidden lever. My father was practical. He believed in contingencies. He pressed the lever. With a low rumble of hydraulics, the entire back wall of the mausoleum shifted and slid open like a bank vault. Behind it wasn't another burial chamber. Behind it was a staircase leading down into darkness. "Welcome to the bunker," Dante said. They descended concrete steps that smelled like underground, like earth and old air. Motion sensors triggered lights that flickered on in sequence, revealing a subterranean room that belonged to another era. Prohibition era, Gianna realized. A smuggler's den that had been retrofitted sometime in the past few decades. The walls were lined with weapons. Not modern tactical gear like the Russians had carried, but serious military hardware. M60 machine guns mounted on tripods, crates stenciled with warnings in 3 languages, RPGs in protective cases, enough firepower to start a small war. But it wasn't the weapons that made her stop breathing. It was the men, 6 of them. Old men, gray-haired and scarred, looking like ghosts from another age. They'd been sitting on crates, sleeping on cots, playing cards at a makeshift table. Now they stood moving with the careful economy of people whose bodies had taken damage over the years. The one in front had an eye patch over his left eye and a prosthetic arm that looked like it belonged in a museum. He stared at Dante, recognition dawning slowly. "Dante Salvatore." His voice was gravel and cigarettes. "You look just like your old man." Then his single eye shifted to Gianna. She saw the exact moment he recognized her, saw his face go pale, saw the cards drop from his remaining hand. "Piccolina Adriana." His voice cracked on the words. "I thought you were dead." She knew that voice. Knew it from before, from childhood memories that felt like photographs left too long in the sun. Silvio Greco." The old man crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into an embrace that smelled like gun oil and old wool. She felt tears, his, not hers. She didn't cry anymore, wet against her hair. "We thought we lost you, little one. We thought the fire took you with your mother." She pulled back, looked at the other 5 men. She knew their faces vaguely. Domenico, who'd driven her to school. Paolo, who'd taught her to shoot a .22 when she was 8. Angelo, Tommaso, Vincenzo, names and faces from a life that felt like someone else's story. "I thought you all died that night." She managed her throat tight. "The report said everyone burned. I thought I was alone." Silvio shook his head, his weathered face creasing with old pain. "Your father ordered us to scatter, to go underground. His last command before he died was clear: if I don't return, hide. Wait. The wolf will come back. We thought he meant you, but after the fire we assumed he'd been wrong." But we kept the vigil anyway. 10 years waiting in this tomb, living like ghosts. Why didn't you find me? The question came out harder than she intended. I was in Zurich. The school kept records. You could have. We tried. Paolo stepped forward, older than she remembered, his hair completely white now. 6 months after the fire, Silvio and I went to Switzerland, but the school said you'd transferred. No forwarding information. We hit dead ends everywhere we looked. Someone had erased your trail professionally. Dante had been watching this reunion in silence, but now he spoke up. Who sent you to Zurich, Adriana? She turned to him, the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. A man came to the school the night my mother died. He said he was one of my father's most trusted people. He had codes, passwords, things only inner circle would know. He said my life was in danger, that enemies would come for me. He gave me a new identity and put me on a plane. Did you ever meet him face to face? No. He always used intermediaries, dead drops, encrypted messages. He called himself... She stopped. The name stuck in her throat like broken glass. The Wolf. Silvio finished, his face going hard. Your father warned us. He said if anything happened to him, beware the Wolf. We thought he meant you, the Wolf's daughter, but he was warning us about someone else. An infiltrator, Gianna breathed. Someone inside the organization. Someone who knew everything. Dante pulled out his phone, brought up a surveillance photo from one of his monitors. Viktor Volkov at a restaurant, but it wasn't the Russian boss he was pointing at. It was the man across the table from him. Late 50s, gray hair, expensive suit. She'd seen his face before on her father's desk in photographs from family gatherings. Enzo Marchetti. Silvio spat the name like poison. Your father's consigliere, the man Marco trusted most. Where is he now? Gianna's hands clenched into fists. Dead, Dante answered. Heart attack 5 years ago. At least that's what the death certificate says. But given what we know about Dr. Volkov and his creative paperwork, who knows? Gianna felt the foundation of her understanding shift again. The handler who'd trained her, who'd aimed her like a missile at Dante Salvatore, who'd kept her isolated and focused on revenge, that had been Marchetti. Working for the Russians, using her as a weapon to finish the job they'd started 10 years ago. She'd been a puppet, a tool. For a decade she'd been dancing on strings pulled by her father's murderer. The rage that filled her was cold and clean, burning away the confusion and grief. So we kill them all. Volkov, Luca, anyone connected to this. We burn their empire to ash. With what army? Dante gestured at the 6 old men. No disrespect to your father's soldiers, but we're talking about maybe 70, 80 Russians, plus however many of my family's men Luca has turned. We're outnumbered 10 to 1. Closer to 12 to 1, Silvio corrected, sitting back down on his crate. Volkov's been recruiting out of Brighton Beach, bringing in Spetsnaz washouts, Afghan veterans, serious operators. Then we don't fight them head on. Gianna walked over to the weapons wall, running her hand along an M60's barrel. We cut off the money. No money, no loyalty. No loyalty, no army. Dante's eyes narrowed. You mentioned tracking Volkov's cash reserves. The Bronx warehouse. How much are we talking? Last I checked, about 8 million in mixed currency, but that's not the real prize. She turned to face the group. Friday night, less than 48 hours from now at 9 p.m., Volkov has a shipment arriving at Port Newark. $50 million in uncut diamonds from the Russian mines. Payment for buying off the union bosses, the Port Authority, everyone he needs to lock down the shipping lanes. How do you know this? Silvio asked, suspicion and respect mixing in his voice. Because I've been planning to steal it for 6 months. I had blueprints of the port schedule's security rotations. Everything was ready. I was just waiting for the right moment to make my move. Dante moved to the table where the old men had been playing cards, swept the deck aside, and unfolded a map of the tri-state area. Port Newark. That's a fortress. Security cameras, roving patrols, probably 20 armed guards minimum just for a shipment that size, plus Volkov's people, plus Luca's people if he's there for the handoff. We'd be walking into a meat grinder. Not if we're smart about it. Gianna joined him at the table, pointed to the port's layout. They're expecting an assault, a frontal attack, a drive-by, maybe a truck bomb. Traditional mafia tactics. What they're not expecting is someone to walk right in the front door with legitimate credentials. She outlined her plan. It was audacious, bordering on suicidal, but it had the virtue of being unexpected. The group listened in silence, the old soldiers nodding at certain points, Dante's expression shifting from skeptical to intrigued to something like admiration. "It could work," he admitted when she finished. "Emphasis on could. We'd need perfect timing, perfect execution, and about 6 kinds of luck." "Luck is just preparation meeting opportunity," Gianna countered. "And we've got 48 hours to prepare." Silvio stood up, his prosthetic arm whirring slightly with the movement. "If we're doing this, we're going to need more than what's in this bunker. We need vehicles, communications equipment, and a way to bypass the port's security systems." "I know a guy," Dante offered. "Runs an electronics shop in Astoria. Owes me a favor. Could get us encrypted radios, maybe some surveillance jammers." "And I know where to get a truck," a new voice added from the stairway. Everyone spun, weapons appearing in hands with startling speed. A massive figure descended the concrete steps, hands raised peacefully. Mike Sullivan, the cook from Luciano's, still wearing his grease-stained chef's coat, now carrying a pump-action Mossberg shotgun. "Easy," he rumbled. "I'm on your side." Dante lowered his weapon. "Mike, how did you—" "I put a tracker on the Raptor 3 months ago. Uncle Luca's orders. He wanted to know where you went at night, what safe houses you used. But I never sent him the data. I liked you better. You never treated me like the help." "You were spying on me." Dante's voice carried more amusement than anger. "Everyone spies on everyone in this business." Mike descended the rest of the way, lowered his hands when he was certain no one would shoot him. "But I heard what Luca said in that garage. Heard him order you killed. That's when I decided whose side I'm really on." Gianna studied the big man. 6'4", maybe 280, with the kind of build that suggested serious gym time or military background. "You said you know where to get a truck." "I said I know where to get a truck that can ram through a warehouse wall. Buddy of mine runs a construction company in Red Hook. Owes me money from a poker game. He's got a Ford F750 with a reinforced bumper they use for demolition work. Should punch through pretty much anything short of a bunker." "Can you get it by tonight?" Dante asked. "Can have it here by noon." Silvio had been watching this exchange with the careful assessment of someone who'd survived decades in a dangerous business by being paranoid. "You're Luca's man. Why should we trust you?" Mike met his gaze without flinching. "I was Luca's man when I thought he was loyal. When I thought he gave a damn about the family. But a man who sells out his own nephew to the Russians, that's not someone I work for. I came to this country when I was 12. Worked my way up from washing dishes. The organization gave me a chance when no one else would. I'm not going to watch some oligarch tear it apart." The logic was sound, but Gianna had learned not to trust easily. "You could be a plant. Luca could have sent you to infiltrate to learn our plans." "I could be," Mike agreed. "But if I was, why would I tell you about the tracker? I could have just led them right to this cemetery. You'd be dead already." Dante considered for a long moment, then nodded. "He's in. We need the numbers and we need that truck. But Mike, if you're playing us, I won't kill you quick." "Fair enough." With Mike added to their roster, they had 9 people, still vastly outnumbered, but it was something. They spent the next hour going over the plan in detail, identifying weak points, developing contingencies. Silvio and his men knew the old ways of doing things, the street-level tactics that had kept them alive through gang wars and federal investigations. Dante brought strategic thinking and knowledge of modern security systems. Gianna contributed the intelligence she'd gathered and the combat training that made her dangerous in close quarters. Mike added his knowledge of vehicles and his willingness to drive a truck through a wall. By the time they finished, dawn was starting to lighten the sky outside. Gianna's exhaustion was a physical weight, but sleep felt impossible. Too much adrenaline, too many revelations, too many variables in the plan they'd sketched out. Dante climbed the stairs back to the mausoleum, and after a moment Gianna followed. They stood among the empty tombs, watching gray light filter through the iron gates. "Are you sure about this?" His voice was quiet, meant for her alone. "This isn't your fight anymore. Your father's killer is dead. Marchetti's dead. You could walk away, disappear, Start over somewhere the Russians won't find you." She considered the offer. A week ago she would have laughed at the idea of partnering with a Salvatore, but that was before the documents, before the revelations, before fighting side by side against a common enemy. "If I walk away now," she said slowly, thinking it through as she spoke, "I'm still the girl who got played, still the weapon someone else aimed. I want to finish this on my terms. Besides," she glanced at him, "someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed. Concerned for my welfare, Castellano. Concerned that if you die, Volkov wins. Can't have that." He smiled, a real smile this time, not the sharp, predatory thing she'd seen in the bistro. "You know, before tonight I'd heard stories about Marco Castellano's daughter. They said she was raised like a princess, sheltered, trained in art and music." "I was trained in art." Gianna's lips quirked. "The art of war. And my music lessons involved learning to move silently, to control my breathing, to become invisible when I needed to be. Your father would be proud." The words hit harder than she expected. She'd spent 10 years trying to honor his memory by seeking revenge on the wrong people. Now finally she had a chance to make things right, to finish what her father had started, to protect what he'd built. "I hope so," she whispered. They stood in silence for a while, watching the cemetery wake up. Birds started singing. Somewhere in the distance, a groundskeeper's truck rumbled to life. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Mike disappeared and returned at noon with the promised F750, a massive truck that looked like it could demolish a house. Dante's contact in Astoria came through with encrypted radios and a set of surveillance jammers that could create dead zones in camera coverage. Silvio and his men cleaned and loaded weapons with the practiced ease of people who'd done it 1,000 times before. Gianna spent the time going over the port layout again and again, memorizing every detail, every camera angle, every patrol route. The plan required split-second timing. One mistake and they'd all die in a concrete warehouse surrounded by men with automatic weapons. At 4 in the afternoon on Thursday, Dante made a phone call. Gianna couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she caught enough to understand he was calling in a favor from someone with connections at City Hall. When he hung up, he looked satisfied. "We're official. As of 1 hour ago, Gia Valentina is a certified Level 3 environmental protection inspector with the authority to conduct surprise inspections at any commercial or industrial facility in the tri-state area." She raised an eyebrow. "That was fast." "Councilman Reeves moves quickly when properly motivated. I have video of him with a 19-year-old escort at the plaza. He was very eager to help." At 7 p.m. on Friday, they gathered in the bunker for final preparations. Silvio distributed weapons. Paolo and Angelo would provide sniper cover from the container stacks on the port's south side. Tommaso and Vincenzo would create a distraction at the east gate to draw off some of the security. Domenico would drive the getaway vehicle, a nondescript panel van stolen from a plumbing company. Mike would handle the F750, positioning it for the critical moment. Dante and Gianna would walk in the front door. "Remember," Silvio instructed, his voice carrying the authority of decades of experience, "the goal isn't to kill everyone. The goal is chaos. We get in, grab the diamonds, and get out before they can organize a proper response. Speed and confusion are our allies." "What about Volkov?" Gianna asked. "If he's there, we can't just leave him." Silvio's expression darkened. "If you get a clean shot, take it. But don't sacrifice the mission for revenge. The diamonds hurt him more than a bullet. No money, no empire." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist that Volkov needed to die for what he'd done to her family. But she also knew Silvio was right. Strategy over satisfaction, the long game over the quick kill. At 8:30 they moved out. The plan called for staged arrivals, everyone coming from different directions, different times, to avoid patterns that might alert security. Gianna and Dante went first in the Raptor, now sporting stolen plates and a magnetic sign that read Tri-State Environmental Services. She'd changed into a severe navy suit and thick-rimmed glasses, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. A laminated ID badge hung from her neck. She looked like exactly what she was pretending to be, a bureaucrat on a mission to make someone's night miserable. The drive to Port Newark took 40 minutes through rain that had started again steady and cold. Neither of them spoke much. The silence was comfortable, the quiet of two people who'd moved past the need to fill every moment with words. At the port's main gate, a bored security guard checked her credentials. The fake ID held up to scrutiny. He waved them through with barely a glance. Inside the port was a maze of shipping containers stacked 5 high cranes, looming like skeletal giants against the sodium vapor lights. Gianna navigated using the map she'd memorized, heading toward Warehouse 12 on the northeastern edge of the facility. 2 minutes, Dante murmured, checking his watch. The distraction hits in 2 minutes. She parked the Raptor in a spot with a clear exit route. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she could see the warehouse. Guards at the entrance, at least 4 of them. More inside, probably. This was it. The point of no return. Dante's hand found hers on the center console. We don't have to do this. We could drive away right now. Head west, new names, new lives. Neither of us owes these people anything. For a moment, she was tempted. The promise of a life without violence, without the weight of family legacies and old debts, felt like oxygen after drowning. But she thought about her father, about Silvio, and the others who'd waited 10 years in a tomb for justice, about the truth that had been buried under lies and manipulation. Yes, we do, she answered, squeezing his hand once before letting go. We owe the truth. We owe the ending. At exactly 9 p.m., an explosion lit up the eastern sky. The distraction, Tommaso and Vincenzo had rigged a fuel truck to blow at the east gate. Guards started running toward the fireball, shouting into radios, scrambling to respond. Gianna stepped out of the truck, clipboard in hand, and walked toward the warehouse with the brisk stride of someone who had every right to be there. Dante followed 2 steps behind, playing the assistant. The guards at the entrance saw her credentials, heard her clipped explanation about a Class 4 chemical leak detected by EPA sensors, and hesitated. Nobody wanted federal heat. One of them pulled out a radio to check with someone inside. I don't have time for bureaucratic delays, she snapped, channeling every officious inspector she'd ever encountered. There are sensors reading dangerous levels of benzene and toluene. If I have to evacuate this entire port because you won't let me verify the source, I'll make sure everyone knows whose fault it was. The threat of blame worked better than violence. The guard stepped aside. Make it quick. They walked into the warehouse. It took a moment for her eyes to adjust from the sodium lights outside to the dimmer interior illumination. The space was massive, probably 40,000 square feet, filled with crates and pallets and forklifts parked in neat rows. In the center, under harsh LED work lights, stood a table. Viktor Volkov sat at the head exactly as she'd imagined from surveillance photos. 45 scar running from left temple to jaw, the kind of face that belonged on wanted posters. Next to him, Luca Salvatore, looking nervous, sweating despite the warehouse chill. Around the table, 12 men in tactical gear, Russians by the look of them, carrying AKMs and wearing ballistic vests. On the table, a brushed aluminum briefcase open, filled with rough diamonds that caught the light like frozen fire. Gianna kept walking, clipboard raised, playing her role. Gentlemen, Environmental Protection Agency. We've detected elevated chemical signatures. I need to conduct a rapid assessment. Volkov didn't even look at her. He was focused on the diamonds, running his fingers through them like water. Luca glanced up, squinted, then did a double take when recognition hit. That's, he started. Volkov's hand shot out, grabbed Luca's wrist. The Russian finally looked at Gianna. His eyes were pale blue ice chips that had seen too much violence to be shocked by more. When he spoke, his English carried a thick accent but perfect grammar. You are no bureaucrat. He sniffed the air like an animal scenting prey. You walk like killer, like soldier. His hand moved toward the pistol on his hip. Luca was half out of his chair, pointing at her with shaking fingers. That's her. That's the Castellano girl. Dante used her. The 12 guards brought their weapons up, safeties clicking off with a sound like breaking twigs. Gianna dropped the clipboard. Now, she said into the radio hidden in her collar. The warehouse's south wall exploded inward. Not literally no explosives, but the effect was the same. Mike's F750 burst through the corrugated steel like it was tissue paper, engine roaring, headlights blinding. The truck didn't stop. It kept coming, plowing through crates and pallets, heading straight for the table. Volkov and Luka dove away. The table flipped, diamonds scattering across concrete like stars. The guards scattered, trying to acquire targets in the chaos. From the container stacks outside, Paolo and Angelo opened fire with suppressed M24 rifles. 2 guards dropped before the others even realized they were taking fire from multiple directions. Gianna wasn't trying to fight all 12 men. She was trying to reach one thing: the briefcase. She dove, sliding across the concrete, her hand closing around the aluminum handle just as Volkov recovered and lunged for it. Their eyes met across 3 feet of space. She saw murder in his gaze, old and patient and certain. Then Dante appeared behind him, Sig Sauer pressed to the back of Volkov's skull. "Don't!" The Russian froze. Around them the warehouse was chaos. Mike had bailed out of the truck and was firing a shotgun at anything that moved. Silvio and his men had breached through a side entrance, their M60 laying down, suppressing fire that chewed through cargo like butter. The Russian guards were shooting back, but they were disorganized, caught between multiple threats. Luka was crawling toward the exit, leaving a trail of blood. He'd been clipped by a ricochet shoulder wound, not fatal. He was screaming into a cell phone, probably calling for reinforcements. Volkov smiled. It was the most terrifying expression Gianna had ever seen, empty of everything except certainty. "You think you win? I have 100 men. More coming. You have old men and stolen truck. This is suicide." "Maybe," Dante acknowledged, "but we're taking your money with us." A massive hand clamped around Gianna's throat from behind. She hadn't seen the guard circle around, too focused on Volkov. He lifted her off her feet, crushing her windpipe. The briefcase fell from her grip. Her vision started to gray at the edges. Somewhere Dante was shouting. A gunshot cracked, but the guard didn't drop. Body armor. Her feet kicked uselessly. The world narrowed to the need for oxygen. Then the pressure released. She fell gasping and rolled in time to see the guard collapsing. Dante stood over him, having put 3 rounds into the gap between helmet and vest. He reached down, pulled her up. "You good?" She couldn't speak, throat too bruised, but she nodded, grabbed the briefcase. They ran. The warehouse was a shooting gallery now, bullets flying from every direction. Mike's truck was their rally point. They made it back to the F750 using the massive vehicle for cover. Silvio and his men were falling back in fighting withdrawal, laying down suppressing fire as they moved. But then Gianna saw it. Volkov had recovered, had grabbed an AKM from a dead guard, was bringing it up to aim at Dante's back. She didn't have a weapon, didn't have time. She had the briefcase full of diamonds, and maybe 2 seconds before Volkov opened fire. In the corner of her vision she saw a red propane cylinder, the kind used for forklift fuel, sitting next to the crashed truck. She saw the gas leak where the cylinder had been damaged, in the impact the faint shimmer of escaping vapor. She threw the briefcase at Dante. "Get down!" He caught it instinctively, looked at her in confusion. Then understanding dawned. He threw himself flat. Gianna didn't have the lighter anymore, Dante had it. But she saw a road flare in the emergency kit strapped to the truck's side panel. She grabbed it, struck it against the rough surface, watched the magnesium ignite. She threw it at the propane cylinder. The universe went white. The explosion was absolute. A fireball that swallowed the back half of the warehouse, heat and pressure and noise that drove thought from her mind. She felt herself lifted, thrown through the air like a doll. Felt the impact of hitting concrete. Felt Dante land on top of her, shielding her with his body. Then silence. Ringing silence. The kind that comes after your eardrums decide they've had enough. She couldn't hear anything, couldn't see through the smoke and dust. But she could feel Dante's weight on her, could feel his chest rising and falling, still breathing, still alive. They crawled through the wreckage. The briefcase had survived somehow, battered but intact. The diamonds inside had scattered again, but there were thousands of them. They could afford to leave some behind. Outside, the panel van was waiting where Domenico had positioned it. Silvio was already inside, bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, but alive. Paolo and Angelo came running from the container stacks. Mike limped up last, his chef's coat torn and smoking, but grinning like a madman. They piled into the van. Domenico hit the gas before the doors were even closed. Behind them, the warehouse burned like a funeral pyre, black smoke rising into the rainy sky. Sirens wailed in the distance. Fire trucks, police, probably federal agencies given the size of the explosion. But they had a head start, and Domenico knew every back road and shortcut in the tri-state area. In the back of the van, Gianna opened the briefcase. Most of the diamonds were there, maybe 37 million worth. Not the full 50 million, but enough to cripple Volkov's plans. Enough to turn his soldiers into mercenaries without a paycheck. "Did we get him?" Silvio asked, pressing a rag to a cut on his forehead. "Did we get Volkov?" Gianna thought about what she'd seen in the last moments before the explosion. Volkov had been close to the propane tank, very close. The fireball had been enormous. "I don't know," she admitted. "But even if he survived, he's broke. And Luca's wounded, probably running. Without money, they're just men. Dangerous, but mortal." Dante was checking his phone, scrolling through messages. Reports coming in. Massive explosion at Port Newark. Multiple casualties. Emergency services overwhelmed. He looked up, met her eyes. "No confirmed deaths yet, but the warehouse is a total loss." They drove in silence for a while, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Gianna's throat hurt where the guard had grabbed her. Her ribs ached from the impact of the explosion. Every muscle in her body felt like it had been beaten with hammers. But they were alive. Against all odds, all 9 of them had survived. Domenico took them to a different safe house, this one in Yonkers, a suburban house that looked aggressively normal. Inside they treated wounds, cleaned weapons, and counted the diamonds. Final tally, 37 million. Enough to rebuild, to bribe, to buy loyalty and respect. Gianna found Dante on the back porch as dawn broke for the second time in 48 hours. The rain had finally stopped. The sky was clearing to pale blue. He handed her a cup of coffee without speaking. They stood together watching the sunrise paint the suburban yards in shades of gold and pink. "Power isn't taken," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "It's inherited or it's built. We just burned down an inheritance. Now we have to build." He turned to look at her fully. "Together." She thought about everything that had happened in the past 3 days. About discovering the truth, about fighting beside him, about the alliance forged in fire and blood, about the future that stretched out before them, uncertain but full of possibility. Yes, she decided, together, but not as separate families pretending to cooperate, as one thing, something new. "That's going to take time," he warned. 6 months minimum just to consolidate territory, buy off the right people, establish legitimacy, maybe longer. Then we have 6 months to figure out if this partnership works. She met his eyes. No more secrets, no more games. Just honest work building something that doesn't repeat our father's mistakes. Deal. He extended his hand. They shook on it, formal and businesslike. This wasn't love, wasn't even friendship yet. It was something more fundamental, alliance based on mutual respect and shared survival. Inside the house, Silvio was organizing the old guard for the next phase. There were territories to claim, rivals to neutralize, alliances to forge. The work would take months, maybe years. But for the first time in a decade, Gianna felt like she was moving towards something instead of running from something. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to build. 6 months later, the neon sign above the door hummed with soft blue light, elegant script that read, Castellano and Salvatore, in gold relief. The interior had been transformed beyond recognition. Gone were the checkered tablecloths and cheap wine bottles. Now dark mahogany panels lined the walls. Velvet booths offered intimate seating, and a jazz quartet played soft standards from a corner stage. Gianna stood behind the bar, mixing a Negroni with the precise movements of someone who'd been trained by the best. She wore silk now, a deep emerald dress that brought out her eyes, not an apron. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders. The scar above her eyebrow was visible. She didn't hide it anymore. The 6 months had been brutal. Consolidating territory, eliminating Volkov's remaining lieutenants, negotiating with the other families. They'd found Luca's body 3 weeks after the port explosion. He'd bled out in a safe house in Newark, alone and abandoned. Volkov himself had vanished. Some said he'd died in the explosion. Others claimed he'd fled back to Russia. Either way, his empire in New York had crumbled. The Castellano-Salvatore alliance had filled the vacuum. Not through violence, though there had been some, but through economics and smart politics. They controlled the ports, now the unions, the construction contracts. Clean money, mostly. Legitimate businesses built on foundations that were gradually being scrubbed of old sins. The door opened. She felt rather than saw him enter the way you feel a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. Dante Salvatore walked in wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that fit like it had been painted on. Water droplets from the evening rain caught the light. He crossed the room to the bar, sat on a stool directly in front of her. "Coffee," he said. "Black." She poured from the French press set the cup down without spilling a drop. "We have a dress code now, you know, and you look like trouble." "I am trouble." His lips quirked. "But you knew that 6 months ago." The tension between them had built slowly over half a year of working together. Late nights planning strategy. Early mornings negotiating deals. Moments of crisis where they'd relied on each other absolutely. It had started as partnership evolved into friendship and become something neither of them wanted to name, but both felt pulling like gravity. "I have a meeting in Rome next week," he said, his voice dropping lower, intimate, despite the crowd around them. "The Sicilian families want to discuss territory agreements. I need a translator, someone who speaks the old dialect, someone I trust with my life." She untied the bar towel from her waist, set it on the polished wood, walked around the bar to stand beside him, close enough to feel the heat coming off him, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with rain. "Rome is beautiful this time of year," she acknowledged. "But ask me properly, in Sicilian." His eyes held hers, dark and intense and full of promises neither of them had made yet. He leaned in close, his lips almost touching her ear, and spoke in the language of their fathers. "Veni cu mia Adriana, senza a tia sugnu sulu un re enta nu tronu vacanti." "Come with me, Adriana. Without you, I'm just a king on an empty throne." She felt the words resonate through her chest, felt the truth in them. They'd built an empire together in 6 months. But empires were just territory and money and power. What they'd built between them was something rarer: trust. She turned her head, closed the last few inches between them, and kissed him. Not gentle, not tentative, but with the certainty of someone who'd fought beside him and knew exactly what she was choosing. When they broke apart, she smiled. "Let's go." They walked out together into the New York night, leaving the coffee steaming on the bar, leaving behind the empire they'd built, leaving behind the ghosts of their fathers and the weight of old vengeance. The city lights spread out before them like promises. Somewhere above the clouds, a plane was waiting to take them to Rome, to new alliances, new challenges, new battles to fight side by side. But tonight, walking through the rain with his hand in hers, Gianna Castellano, daughter of the wolf, heir to an empire, queen in her own right, felt something she hadn't felt in 10 years. She felt free. They said revenge was a dish best served cold. But she'd learned something better: power was warmer when shared. Her father had taught her to be a wolf. Dante had taught her to be a queen. And together, they were unstoppable. Behind them in the restaurant that bore both their names, Silvio watched from the window and smiled. The old man raised his glass in a silent toast to the future. The wolf's daughter had finally come home.